In the world of military precision where every second counts and failure means lives lost, there exists a moment that defies all logic. A moment when time becomes your greatest enemy, distance becomes impossible to overcome, and success depends on a single bullet finding its mark against all odds. This is not a story about luck. This is not a tale of superhuman abilities or movie-like heroics. This is the raw, unfiltered account of General Sarah Martinez, a decorated marksman whose entire career came down to 10 minutes, 800 meters, and one impossible shot that would either save hundreds of lives or haunt her forever. When the radio crackled to life at 9:37 a.m. on a dusty morning in Afghanistan, no one could have predicted that the next 10 minutes would become legend. No one could have imagined that a middle-aged general would have to abandon everything she knew about protocol, strategy, and common sense to attempt something that military textbooks would call suicide. But sometimes, the impossible is the only option left. What happened next would be studied in military academies for decades, questioned by experts worldwide, and remembered by those who witnessed it as the moment when time itself seemed to bend to the will of one determined woman with a rifle and an unshakable belief that some shots are worth taking, no matter the odds. This is that story. General Sarah Martinez had been awake for 36 hours straight when the emergency call came through her radio at Forward Operating Base Crimson. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan desert, and the temperature was already climbing toward what would be another scorching day. At 52 years old, Martinez had spent more than half her life in military service, rising through the ranks not just because of her strategic mind, but because of a skill that had made her legendary among snipers worldwide. She could make shots that others deemed impossible. The radio crackled with static before Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison's urgent voice cut through. "General, we have a code red situation at Checkpoint Delta. Multiple casualties, immediate extraction required. But we have a problem." Martinez set down her coffee, instantly alert despite her exhaustion. Checkpoint Delta was a critical outpost 15 kilometers northeast of their position, manned by a team of 12 soldiers who monitored Taliban movement through the mountain passes. These weren't green recruits. They were seasoned veterans who knew how to handle themselves in a firefight. "Report, Morrison," she commanded, already reaching for her tactical gear. "Taliban ambush hit them hard around 0600 hours. 8 of our people are down, 4 still mobile but pinned down in the communications bunker. The problem is Malik Hassan." Martinez felt her blood chill. Hassan was a Taliban commander who had been terrorizing coalition forces for 3 years. Intelligence reports described him as methodical, cruel, and extremely effective. More importantly, he was known for taking prisoners alive for information and propaganda purposes, a fate worse than death for captured soldiers. "Hassan has positioned himself on Ridgepoint Bravo," Morrison continued. "He's got a clear line of sight to the bunker and 2 RPGs. Our intel says he's planning to blow the bunker at 1,000 hours sharp. He wants our people to watch the countdown." Classic psychological warfare. Martinez checked her watch. 093. 7 hours. 23 minutes. "Air support?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Negative. Sandstorm brewing to the north. All aircraft grounded. Ground reinforcements are 40 minutes out minimum. The terrain between here and Delta is impassable for vehicles. Too rocky, too many choke points where Hassan's men could pick us off." Martinez closed her eyes, her tactical mind automatically calculating distances, wind patterns, elevation changes. Ridgepoint Bravo was a notorious sniper's nest that overlooked 3 different valleys. It was approximately 800 meters from the communications bunker, positioned at an elevation that made it nearly impossible to approach undetected. But there was something else about Ridgepoint Bravo that made her stomach clench with a mixture of dread and possibility. The ridge was exactly 830 meters from the old watchtower on Hill 47, a crumbling structure left over from the Soviet occupation that provided one of the few vantage points with a clear sideline to the ridge. "General?" Morrison's voice pulled her back to the immediate crisis. "What are your orders?" Martinez looked at her sniper rifle, a custom-built M24 that had been with her through 4 deployments. The weapon was an extension of herself, calibrated to her breathing patterns, her heartbeat, even the way she naturally pulled the trigger. She had made shots at distances that other snipers considered pure luck, but Martinez knew better. Every impossible shot was the result of thousands of hours of practice, an intimate understanding of ballistics, weather patterns, and most importantly, the ability to find absolute stillness in chaos. "Get me a vehicle to the base of Hill 47, she said, surprising Morrison with her calm tone. "I need current wind readings, temperature, humidity, everything you can give me on environmental conditions." General, Hill 47 is 800 meters from Ridge Point Bravo. Even for you, that's my problem to solve, Colonel. Those 4 soldiers in that bunker are my responsibility. Hassan wants to make them suffer before he kills them, and I won't let that happen. Martinez began methodically checking her equipment. Her rifle scope was zeroed perfectly, the weapon cleaned and maintained to perfection. She had 180 rounds of match-grade ammunition, each bullet precisely measured and balanced. Her ghillie suit would provide some camouflage, though at Hill 47's exposed position, concealment would be minimal. General, I have to ask, have you ever made a shot at that distance under these conditions? Martinez paused in her preparations. The longest confirmed kill shot in military history was 2,475 meters, made by a Canadian sniper in Iraq. But that shot had been made from a stable position with a spotter, perfect weather conditions, and time to calculate every variable. What she was contemplating was different, a single shot, under pressure, with lives hanging in the balance and no opportunity for a second attempt. No, Morrison, I haven't. She continued loading her gear into a tactical backpack. Extra water, emergency medical supplies, backup communication equipment. She was preparing for a mission that might be one way, and both she and Morrison understood this without speaking it aloud. Then why? Because someone has to try. Those soldiers didn't choose to be in that bunker, but I'm choosing to take this shot. That's what leadership means sometimes, making the choice when no good options exist. Martinez climbed into the Humvee that Morrison had prepared, and they began the bumpy ride toward Hill 47. The ancient watchtower had been used by Soviet forces in the 1980s, then abandoned when they withdrew. Coalition forces had considered demolishing it several times, but its strategic position made it valuable as an observation post, even if it was too exposed for permanent manning. As they drove, Morrison provided updates over the radio. Intelligence reports Hassan has approximately 30 fighters with him on the ridge. He's made no attempt to conceal his position. Typical arrogance. He wants our people to see him up there, wants them to know exactly where their death is coming from. Time check. 09:47 hours, 13 minutes remaining. Martinez felt her heart rate steady rather than increase. This was a phenomenon she had experienced before in high-pressure situations, her body's automatic shift into what she privately called sniper mode. Her breathing deepened and slowed, her vision seemed to sharpen, and peripheral distractions faded away. It was a state of focused calm that had served her well through countless missions. The Humvee reached the base of Hill 47, and Martinez shouldered her pack. The climb to the watchtower would take approximately 6 minutes at a steady pace. Once there, she would have perhaps 3 minutes to set up her shot, calculate wind drift, elevation adjustment, and all the other variables that would determine whether her bullet found its target. General, Morrison said as she prepared to leave the vehicle, I've been thinking about this shot. Even if you hit Hassan, his men will still be up there. They could still attack the bunker. Martinez nodded grimly. That's why I have to make sure the first shot counts for more than just killing Hassan. I need to create enough chaos and fear among his fighters that they retreat rather than advance. Taliban fighters follow strong leaders, take out Hassan in a way that demonstrates superior marksmanship, and many of them will decide this isn't a fight they want to finish. She began climbing Hill 47, her boots finding purchase on the rocky slope. The watchtower loomed above her, a crumbling testament to previous conflicts that had swept through this unforgiving landscape. Each step brought her closer to a shot that would either save 4 lives or add to a list of failures. Behind her, Morrison coordinated with the team at Checkpoint Delta, providing updates on her position and estimated timeline. The soldiers in the bunker now knew that help was coming in the form of a single sniper attempting an impossible shot. They would be counting the minutes, perhaps looking through cracks in their defensive position toward Ridge Point Bravo, wondering if they were about to witness salvation or simply a futile gesture. Martinez reached the watchtower at 09:05, 2 hours. 8 minutes remaining. The structure was more deteriorated than aerial photographs had indicated, with chunks of concrete missing and steel reinforcement bars exposed and rusted. But the fundamental platform was solid, and more importantly, it provided an unobstructed view toward Ridge Point Bravo. She could see Hassan's position clearly through her scope, a figure in desert camouflage positioned behind a large boulder, with what appeared to be an RPG system set up beside him. Other fighters were visible spread along the ridge, some in covered positions, others standing carelessly in the open. Hassan himself seemed relaxed, occasionally gesturing toward the valley where the communications bunker was located. Martinez began setting up her shot, her movements automatic and precise. Bipod deployed, rifle positioned, scope adjusted for the distance and elevation difference. She pulled out a small wind meter and took readings, noting that the morning air was relatively still, a piece of luck that could make the difference between success and failure. The mathematics of the shot began running through her mind like a familiar equation. 830 meters distance. Target elevation approximately 40 meters higher than her position. Wind from the southeast at 4 miles per hour. Temperature rising toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity at 32%. At this distance, her bullet would take approximately 1.2 seconds to reach the target. During that time, Hassan could move, wind conditions could shift, and dozens of other variables could affect the trajectory. But Martinez had learned long ago that perfect shots weren't about controlling every variable. They were about accepting uncertainty while executing the fundamentals flawlessly. She settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of her rifle's stock against her shoulder, her cheek welded to the proper position on the stock, her breathing falling into the rhythm that had become second nature over decades of training. Through her scope, Hassan came into sharp focus. He was older than the intelligence photos had suggested, perhaps in his mid-40s, with a graying beard and the confident posture of someone who believed himself untouchable. He was speaking to one of his fighters, pointing toward the bunker, probably finalizing the timing of his attack. 095, 4 hours, 6 minutes remaining. Martinez made her final scope adjustments and settled into the zone of absolute concentration that separated successful snipers from everyone else. The world narrowed to 3 points: her position, the crosshairs in her scope, and Hassan's center mass 800 meters away. But as she prepared to take the shot that would define her career and possibly save 4 lives, Martinez realized that the mathematical precision she relied upon was about to be tested by the one variable no sniper could ever fully control: time itself, and whether she would have enough of it to make the impossible possible. At 0954 hours, General Martinez controlled her breathing and began the final sequence that every sniper knew by heart: assess, calculate, commit. Through her scope, she could see Hassan moving with the casual confidence of a predator who believed his prey was trapped. He checked his watch, a detail that sent a chill through Martinez as she realized he was counting down to the execution of 4 American soldiers. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming from the southwest at approximately 5 miles per hour. Martinez made a minute adjustment to her scope, compensating for the bullet drift that the crosswind would cause over 800 meters. At this distance, a miscalculation of even 1 mile per hour of wind could result in a miss by several inches. The difference between a successful mission and catastrophic failure. Her radio crackled softly. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might somehow alert Hassan to their presence. General, we're monitoring Taliban radio chatter. Hassan has confirmed the timeline. 1,000 hours exactly. He's treating this like a public execution. Martinez didn't respond immediately. She was deep in the mental state that had made her legendary, a place where external distractions faded, and the only reality was the relationship between her rifle, the target, and the space between them. But Morrison's words reinforced what she already understood. This wasn't just about marksmanship. This was about psychological warfare, and Hassan had chosen to make this moment a demonstration of Taliban power. Which meant her shot needed to be more than accurate. It needed to be devastating. She observed Hassan's movement patterns through her scope. Every 90 seconds, he walked 3 steps to his left to check on the RPG setup, then returned to his original position. The movement was consistent, automatic, the behavior of someone following a mental checklist while waiting for a predetermined time. Martinez realized this pattern was actually an advantage. Instead of trying to hit a stationary target who might move unpredictably at the moment of firing, she could time her shot to intercept Hassan during his movement cycle. It would require split-second timing, but it would also mean that her bullet would find a target whose position she could predict. She checked her watch. 0956 hours. 4 minutes remaining. The mathematics became more complex now. She needed to calculate not just where Hassan was, but where he would be. 1.2 seconds after she fired. If she timed the shot correctly, Hassan would walk directly into her bullet's path, creating what snipers called a controlled interception. But there was another factor that made this shot particularly challenging. The elevation difference between her position and Hassan's created a ballistic arc that was difficult to calculate precisely. Her bullet would follow a parabolic path, rising slightly after leaving the barrel, then falling toward the target. At 800 meters with a 40-meter elevation difference, she needed to aim approximately 18 inches high to compensate for bullet drop. Martinez made the scope adjustment, then settled back into her shooting position. Through the crosshairs, she could see individual details of Hassan's face: the scar running from his left temple to his jawline. The way he squinted slightly against the morning sun, the casual arrogance in his posture that came from years of successful operations against coalition forces. This was personal now, though Martinez was careful not to let emotion affect her technique. Hassan represented everything that made this war so difficult, an enemy who understood that psychological warfare could be more effective than superior firepower, who deliberately targeted the humanity of his opponents by forcing them to watch their comrades suffer. Her radio whispered again, "General, we're getting reports that Hassan's fighters are taking positions around the bunker perimeter. After 1,000 hours, they plan to advance and take prisoners." The tactical situation was becoming clearer. Hassan wasn't just planning to kill the 4 soldiers in the bunker. He was orchestrating a complex operation designed to capture them alive for interrogation and propaganda purposes. The RPG attack at 1,000 hours would damage the bunker enough to force the soldiers out, but not enough to kill them immediately. This realization added another layer of pressure to Martinez's shot. If she missed, or if her shot only wounded Hassan without stopping the operation, the 4 soldiers would face capture and torture. She had seen intelligence reports about Hassan's treatment of prisoners, and the images still haunted her nightmares. Martinez felt her heart rate slow even further, dropping to what her medical record showed was an unusually low resting rate of 48 beats per minute. This physiological response had been documented in elite snipers, the body's automatic adaptation to extreme stress that actually improved performance rather than degrading it. She began her final breathing cycle. Deep breath in, let it out slowly. Another breath in, let half of it out, then hold. In this moment of respiratory pause, her body would be at its most stable, her natural tremor reduced to virtually zero. This was the window when precision was possible. 0957 hours. 3 minutes remaining. Through her scope, Martinez watched Hassan begin another movement cycle. 3 steps to the left, check the RPG, return to position. She timed the sequence, 12 seconds total, with Hassan spending approximately 3 seconds in transit each way. She would fire at the moment Hassan began his return journey to his original position. At that instant, he would be moving in a predictable direction, at a consistent speed, and her bullet would intersect his path approximately 2 steps into his movement. The plan was formed. Now came the hardest part. Execution under pressure that few people in human history had ever experienced. Martinez's radio crackled one final time before she would take the shot. Morrison's voice carried a note of desperation that he was trying to control. "General, Hassan is making some kind of announcement to his fighters. Our translator says he's telling them that after the Americans die, they'll advance to the next checkpoint. This isn't just about Delta. He's planning a larger offensive." The scope of the situation expanded in Martinez's mind. If Hassan's operation succeeded, it wouldn't just cost 4 lives. It would likely trigger a series of attacks that could overwhelm multiple positions and result in dozens of casualties. Her single shot had become the pivot point for a much larger tactical situation. But this realization, rather than increasing her pressure, actually helped Martinez find an even deeper level of calm. The shot was no longer about her personal skill or reputation. It was about the fundamental purpose of her military service, protecting the soldiers under her command and disrupting enemy operations that threatened American lives. She watched Hassan through her scope, noting that his confidence seemed to be increasing as 1,000 hours approached. He was speaking more animatedly to his fighters, gesturing toward the valley, clearly enjoying the psychological power of controlling the timeline of other people's deaths. Martinez made one final scope adjustment, a minute correction based on her observation that the wind had decreased slightly. The morning air was becoming more stable as the sun climbed higher, which would actually improve her accuracy by reducing the unpredictable variables that could affect bullet trajectory. 0958 hours. 2 minutes remaining. She settled into her final shooting position, every aspect of her body alignment perfected through decades of training. Her left elbow was positioned directly under the rifle for maximum stability. Her right hand gripped the pistol grip firmly but not tightly, allowing for smooth trigger control. Her cheek was welded to the stock in exactly the same position she had used for thousands of practice shots. The crosshair settled on the point where Hassan would be when her bullet arrived, not where he was now, but where he would be 1.2 seconds in the future, based on his movement pattern and the ballistic flight time of her bullet. Martinez began her final breathing cycle, feeling her body settle into the profound stillness that separated successful long-range shots from attempts. Her peripheral vision faded, her awareness of temperature and discomfort disappeared, and her entire consciousness narrowed to the relationship between her rifle and the target. Through her scope, she watched Hassan check his watch and say something to one of his fighters. The man nodded and moved toward the RPG system, beginning what was clearly a final preparation sequence. Martinez realized with crystal clarity that the next 60 seconds would determine not just whether she could make an impossible shot, but whether her entire career of military service would be defined by this single moment when everything she had learned about marksmanship, leadership, and courage would be tested simultaneously. The countdown to 1,000 hours continued, each second bringing Hassan closer to his planned execution of 4 American soldiers. But Martinez was no longer thinking about time as an enemy. She was thinking about it as a partner in a deadly dance where precision and timing would determine who lived and who died. At 0959 hours, she began the final sequence that would either save 4 lives or haunt her forever. Hassan started his movement cycle, walking toward the RPG position with the casual confidence of someone who believed the next 60 seconds belonged to him. He was about to discover that General Sarah Martinez had different plans for those 60 seconds. At 0959 hours and 30 seconds, General Martinez entered the zone that separates legendary shots from impossible dreams. Her breathing had settled into the rhythm that made precision possible. Her heart rate had dropped to the point where she could feel the pause between beats, and her vision had narrowed to the crystal-clear image in her scope crosshairs. Hassan was beginning his movement cycle, walking with confident steps toward the RPG position, where one of his fighters was making final adjustments to the weapon that would destroy the communications bunker and the 4 American soldiers inside it. Martinez's finger found the trigger of her M24 rifle, settling into the familiar groove that had been worn smooth by thousands of hours of practice. The trigger pull on her weapon was precisely calibrated to 2.5 pounds, light enough for precision, heavy enough to prevent accidental discharge. She began applying pressure gradually, taking up the slack in the mechanism while tracking Hassan's movement through her scope. 15 seconds remaining until 1,000 hours. Through her scope, Martinez could see Hassan's face clearly. He was smiling. Not the grim satisfaction of a soldier completing a necessary mission, but the cruel pleasure of someone who enjoyed inflicting suffering. He said something to his fighter at the RPG, and both men laughed. They were treating the imminent deaths of 4 Americans as entertainment. This image crystallized Martinez's resolve. The shot she was about to attempt wasn't just about marksmanship or military tactics, it was about fundamental human decency and the responsibility that came with the power to protect innocent lives. 10 seconds remaining. Hassan completed his check of the RPG and began his return walk to his original position. This was the moment Martinez had calculated with mathematical precision. Hassan walking in a straight line at a consistent speed, his position predictable for the next 2.4 seconds. Martinez's finger increased pressure on the trigger while her scope tracked Hassan's movement. The crosshairs remained steady on a point 18 inches above Hassan's center mass, compensating for bullet drop over 800 meters. Her breathing had stopped naturally at the bottom of an exhale, creating the physiological stillness that made extreme precision possible. 5 seconds remaining until 1,000 hours. Hassan took his first step back towards his original position. Martinez's internal countdown synchronized with the ballistic timing she had calculated. Fire now, and her bullet would travel for 1.2 seconds while Hassan continued walking, arriving at the exact moment when he would be in the predetermined location. 3 seconds remaining. Hassan took his second step. Martinez's finger completed the trigger pull with the smooth, steady pressure that she had practiced until it became automatic. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, and Martinez watched through her scope as the bullet began its journey across 800 meters of empty air. For 1.2 seconds, the fate of 4 American soldiers hung in the balance while a single bullet traveled faster than the speed of sound toward a target who had no idea that death was approaching him at 2,800 feet per second. Hassan took his third step, exactly as Martinez had predicted. The bullet struck him in the upper chest, the impact spinning him around and dropping him instantly to the rocky ground of Ridge Point Bravo. Through her scope, Martinez saw the immediate chaos that erupted among Hassan's fighters, men diving for cover, shouting in confusion. Their carefully planned operation suddenly transformed into a desperate search for an invisible enemy. Martinez immediately worked the bolt of her rifle, chambering another round while maintaining observation of the ridge through her scope. Hassan was down and motionless, but 30 other fighters remained, and she needed to assess whether they would continue the attack or retreat in confusion. The Taliban fighters were scrambling for defensive positions, clearly terrified by the precision of a shot that had come from nowhere. Several men were shouting orders in Pashto, but without Hassan's commanding presence, there was no unified response. Martinez could see through her scope that some fighters were looking toward the valley, trying to locate the source of the shot, while others were checking Hassan's body. Her radio crackled to life. Morrison's voice was tight with excitement and relief. "General, that was a confirmed hit. Hassan is down. Repeat, Hassan is down." But Martinez remained focused on the tactical situation. The shot had been successful, but the mission wouldn't be complete until the threat to the communications bunker was neutralized entirely. She watched the Taliban fighters through her scope, analyzing their behavior to determine whether they would press their attack or withdraw. What she observed gave her hope. Without Hassan's leadership and faced with the psychological impact of watching their commander killed by an invisible sniper, the Taliban fighters were beginning to retreat from their positions. The RPG operator had abandoned his weapon and was moving toward cover. Other fighters were gathering their equipment and beginning to move away from the ridge. Martinez's shot had accomplished more than killing Hassan. It had shattered the confidence and unity of his force. But she wasn't finished. Martinez had learned from years of combat experience that partial victories could quickly turn into defeats if enemy forces were allowed to regroup and counterattack. She needed to ensure that Hassan's fighters withdrew completely from the area, removing any possibility of a renewed assault on Checkpoint Delta. She identified the Taliban fighter who seemed to be attempting to take command after Hassan's death, a younger man who was gesturing urgently toward the abandoned RPG position. Martinez adjusted her scope slightly and fired her second shot. The bullet struck the ground 2 feet in front of the would-be commander, sending up a spray of rock fragments and dirt. The message was clear. Anyone who tried to continue Hassan's operation would be the next target of an invisible sniper who had just demonstrated the ability to make impossible shots. The psychological effect was immediate and decisive. The Taliban fighters abandoned any pretense of continuing their attack and began a full retreat from Ridgepoint Bravo. Martinez watched through her scope as they carried Hassan's body and withdrew toward the mountain passes that led deeper into Taliban-controlled territory. Within minutes, the ridge was empty except for the abandoned RPG and scattered equipment that Hassan's fighters had left behind in their haste to escape. Martinez's radio came alive with multiple voices. Morrison coordinating the immediate response, the soldiers at Checkpoint Delta confirming that the threat had withdrawn, and air support reporting that the weather conditions were clearing enough to allow helicopter evacuation of the wounded. But Martinez remained in position for several more minutes, continuing to observe Ridgepoint Bravo through her scope to ensure that the Taliban withdrawal was genuine rather than a tactical repositioning. Only when she was satisfied that Hassan's fighters had completely left the area did she begin to pack her equipment. The climb down from Hill 47 gave Martinez time to process what had just occurred. She had attempted a shot that military textbooks would classify as impossible. 800 meters, under extreme time pressure, with multiple lives hanging in the balance. Not only had she succeeded, but she had done so with the kind of precision that would become the subject of analysis and debate for years to come. When she reached the Humvee where Morrison was waiting, his expression combined relief, admiration, and a touch of disbelief. "General, I've been in the military for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like that shot. How did you know you could make it?" Martinez secured her rifle in the vehicle and considered the question seriously. The honest answer was that she hadn't known with certainty that she could make the shot. At 800 meters under those conditions, success had required not just skill and preparation, but also the kind of luck that couldn't be counted on in military planning. "I didn't know I could make it, Colonel. But I knew that not taking the shot would guarantee the deaths of 4 American soldiers. Sometimes leadership means accepting impossible odds because the alternative is unacceptable." As they drove back toward Forward Operating Base Crimson, Martinez received updates on the evacuation of Checkpoint Delta. All 4 surviving soldiers were being transported to medical facilities, and their wounds, while serious, were not life-threatening. The intelligence value of capturing Hassan alive would have been significant, but eliminating him had effectively disrupted Taliban operations in the region for months. Later that day, Martinez filed her official report on the incident. The document was precise and factual, describing the tactical situation, the decision-making process, and the results of her intervention. But she knew that the bare facts couldn't capture the reality of those final minutes, when time had seemed to slow down and the impossible had become necessary. Word of Martinez's shot spread quickly through military circles. The combination of distance, conditions, and time pressure made it one of the most remarkable pieces of marksmanship in military history, but Martinez was uncomfortable with the attention and legend building that followed. For her, the shot at Ridgepoint Bravo wasn't about setting records or demonstrating superhuman skill. It was about the fundamental responsibility that came with military leadership. the willingness to risk everything when other people's lives depended on your actions. Years later, when Martinez retired from military service, she would be asked repeatedly about that morning in Afghanistan. Reporters wanted to know about the technical aspects of the shot. Military historians wanted to analyze the tactical decisions, and fellow snipers wanted to understand how she had achieved such precision under impossible conditions. But Martinez's answer was always the same. The most important part of that day wasn't the marksmanship or the distance or the timing. It was the decision to take responsibility for other people's lives when no one else could. Everything that followed, the calculations, the steady breathing, the precise trigger pull, was just the technical execution of a moral choice. The 4 soldiers who survived the siege at Checkpoint Delta went on to complete their deployments and return home to their families. Hassan's death effectively ended Taliban operations in that sector of Afghanistan for the remainder of the year. The communications bunker was repaired and continued to serve as a critical intelligence gathering point for coalition forces. And General Sarah Martinez learned that sometimes the impossible shot isn't about the distance or the conditions, or even the skill required to make it. Sometimes it's simply about the willingness to try when trying is the only option that allows you to live with yourself afterward. The shot that everyone called impossible had actually been inevitable, not because Martinez possessed superhuman abilities, but because when faced with the choice between attempting the impossible and accepting the unacceptable, there had really been no choice at all. At 0947 on that morning in Afghanistan, time had been her enemy. By 1,000 hours, it had become her ally in creating a moment that would be remembered long after the tactical details were forgotten. It was the moment when a general with a rifle and 10 minutes to spare proved that sometimes the most important victories are measured not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in lives saved by someone willing to attempt what others believed could not be done. The general had 10 minutes left. She sprinted 800 meters and made the impossible shot at 9:47.